Hey guys, tonight, we're not climbing to the sunlit halls of Olympus. We're not stepping into grand battles or listening to the whispers of oracles. Instead, we're journeying downward, past the roots of the mountains and below the silent, drifting floor of the ocean, to a place all mortals eventually find. We are descending into the Greek underworld. But this isn't the realm of fire and brimstone you might imagine. To the ancient Greeks, it was something far more mysterious, a kingdom of quiet, of order, and of memory. It was the final, somber destination at the end of every road. If this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There's a certain comfort in knowing others are drifting off to the same quiet tales. So get comfortable. Let the world settle around you. And let's begin our journey into what the Greek underworld was really like. So, let us begin, as all souls must, by letting go of the world of sunlight. To the ancient Greeks, death wasn't an end born of sin, nor was it a gateway to fiery punishment. It was simply what came next. It was inevitable, a natural law, as certain as the rising of the sun. And so their underworld was not a place of chaos, but of immense, unshakable order. It was a kingdom, complete with its own geography, its own rules, and a king who valued structure above all else. Forget the images of demons and devils that later ages would paint. The Greek underworld was a realm of shadow and mist, of quiet and echoes. It was a vast, gray and silent place where souls drifted like leaves in a slow, unending autumn. Most who arrived were not judged as good or evil in the way we might think of it now. They were simply finished. Their stories had been told, their time in the sun had passed, and now they belonged to the quiet eternity of the dark. This kingdom was ruled by a god who was as misunderstood as the realm he governed. Hades, the eldest son of Cronus and Rhea, was not a figure of malice. He wasn't a tempter of mortals or a hunter of souls. He was, in essence, the universe's most solitary and dutiful administrator. While his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, meddled and raged in the world above, Hades remained in his realm, ensuring the one great certainty of existence was managed with quiet dignity. He was a god of silence, not of cruelty. His power did not flash in the sky. It simply endured, a constant presence beneath the roots of the world. Mortals feared him, yes, but it was a fear rooted in respect for the inevitable. You did not pray to Hades for favors, but you acknowledged his domain with a whisper. To speak his name was to draw his gaze, and his gaze was a heavy thing, for it reminded you that your vibrant, colorful world was only temporary. The realm itself was thought of as a dim reflection of life, a place where passions cooled, memories faded, and the self slowly dissolved into a collective, sorrowful murmur. It wasn't a place of active torment for most, but of a profound and eternal melancholy. The joy of life, the warmth of the sun, the taste of wine, the touch of a loved one was gone. And what remained was a hollow echo. This was the true sadness of the Greek afterlife, not pain, but the absence of everything that made being alive worthwhile. And to enter this realm, every soul, from the most powerful king to the humblest farmer, had to begin the journey in the same way with a quiet farewell and a single, precious coin. The journey, for the soul, began with the final loving acts of the living. A person's passage into the underworld was not guaranteed to be smooth. It was conditional, depending entirely on the proper respect paid by those left behind. To be forgotten or neglected was to risk a fate far worse than mere death. It was to be lost between worlds. Imagine a room in ancient Greece, quiet except for the soft sounds of morning. Once the soul had departed, the family's sacred duty began. The body was washed, anointed with fragrant oils, and dressed in fine white burial robes. It was a final act of care, a preparation for a long and uncertain journey. And then came the most crucial step of all. A single coin, an obelisk, was carefully placed in the mouth of the deceased. This small piece of metal was more valuable than any earthly treasure, for it was the fare required by the grim ferrymen who guarded the waters of the dead. Without it, the soul would be turned away, doomed to wander the misty shores of the river Styx for 100 years, forever watching others pass into the realm they could not reach. For a day, the body would lie in state in the home, a period of formal mourning where family and friends could pay their final respects. Before dawn on the following day, a quiet procession would wind through the streets, carrying the departed to their final resting place outside the city walls. These rituals were not just for the living, they were a signal to the gods below that this soul was loved, remembered, and ready. And at that moment of transition, as the world of the living faded, a guide would appear, not a terrifying specter of death, but a familiar, if fleeting, presence. This was Hermes, the messenger god, in his most solemn role. Psychopompus, the guide of souls. With his winged sandals and his iconic staff, he would materialize not to judge or frighten, but simply to escort. He was the quiet shepherd of the newly departed, his presence a comforting sign that you were not entirely alone. He would lead the soul away from its home, away from the warmth of the sun, and down the winding, shadowy path that led to the very edge of the underworld, to the dark, waiting waters of a river from which no traveler ever returned. Led by Hermes, the soul arrives at the threshold. This is no grand, ornate gate, but a wound in the world, a dark cave dripping with moisture, or a chasm that breathes a cold, lifeless air. The last whispers of the living world fade behind you, replaced by a profound and unending silence. Here, the geography is not made of rock and soil, but of sorrow, memory, and myth. The underworld is defined by its borders, and its borders are 5 great, ghostly rivers that flow with more than just water. The first and most famous is the river Styx. Its name means hate, and its waters are black and still, like liquid night. This is the river of unbreakable oaths, so powerful that even the gods themselves swear by its name, knowing that to break such a vow would mean a punishment of unimaginable length. The Styx is a boundary of cosmic significance, a solemn and final barrier between life and death. It is on these shores that souls without fare are doomed to wander for a century, unheard and forgotten. They can only watch as the ferryman carries the more fortunate across the gloomy water. Nearby flows the Acheron, the river of pain and sorrow. It is a vast, gray expanse, its waters wide and murky with the grief of ages. It is often the Acheron that the ferryman, Charon, navigates, his silent barge cutting through the endless melancholy. To cross the Acheron is to leave behind the sharp, specific pains of life, and to enter a realm where sorrow is the very air you breathe, a constant, dull ache that has no end. From a tributary of the Styx emerges the quietest, the river of lamentation. The myths say its waters are formed from the ceaseless tears of the damned, the wails of those punished in the depths of Tartarus. Its banks are frozen, and its flow is sluggish, carrying with it an audible echo of weeping that chills the soul to its core. It is a river of pure, undiluted grief, a soundscape of despair that reminds all who pass it of the consequences of a life lived badly. In the deepest parts of the realm, a strange and terrible light emanates from the Phlegethon, the river of fire. Yet, this is not a fire that offers warmth or comfort. The Phlegethon burns without consuming, a torrent of liquid flame that illuminates the darkest corners of the underworld but provides no solace. It is a river of rage and punishment, its fiery current surrounding the great pit of Tartarus, acting as a searing wall to keep its prisoners contained in eternal, fiery agony. And finally, there is the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Unlike the others, its waters are milky, white, and silent, flowing gently through the asphodel meadows. To drink from the Lethe is to receive a final, sorrowful gift, oblivion. Its waters wash away the memories of life, the joys, the loves, the pains, the very identity of the soul. It is a peaceful but tragic end, a final dissolution of the self before entering the endless, dreamless existence that awaits the common dead. These 5 rivers form the veins of the underworld, each a current of emotion and meaning, and every soul must navigate them to find its final, quiet place. Here, at the water's edge, Hermes' duty is done. He offers no final words of comfort, no parting wisdom. He simply fades back into the shadows, leaving the newly departed souls alone before the vast, dark expanse of the river. They are no longer in the world of men, but not yet truly in the realm of the dead. They are in a place of waiting. And the entity they wait for soon appears, gliding out of the oppressive mist. This is Charon, the ferryman of the underworld. He is a figure as ancient and unforgiving as the river itself. Imagine a tall, skeletal old man, his skin stretched taut over bone, his eyes hollowed out by eons of staring into the darkness. His beard is a tangled, grimy mess, and his robes are the rags of a workman who has never known a day of rest. He pilots a crude, wooden skiff, not with oars, but with a long pole that he thrusts into the murky riverbed, his movements weary, but practiced. He does not speak, he does not greet, he simply arrives, and the silence that accompanies him is heavier than any sound. The shades of the dead, a great murmuring crowd of them, press forward towards the bank, their forms translucent and flickering. They jostle and push, a silent panic rippling through them, for they know the ferry is their only way forward. But Charon is unmoved by their desperation. He holds out a gnarled, dirt-caked hand. This is the moment of truth. One by one, the souls who were properly buried step forward. They reach into their mouths and produce the single obelisk, the coin placed there by their loved ones. The small piece of silver or bronze, now cold with the chill of death, is dropped into Charon's waiting palm. The transaction is swift, silent, and utterly impersonal. Upon receiving payment, Charon nods once, a curt, dismissive gesture, and allows the soul to climb aboard the unsteady skiff. But for those who have no coin, the unburied, the forgotten, the shipwrecked whose bodies were never recovered, there is no passage. Charon's expression, for the first time, shifts into something resembling a snarl. With his pole, he mercilessly shoves them back from the shore, their silent pleas and desperate gestures meaning nothing to him. They are the unfortunates, condemned to wander the cold, foggy banks of the Styx for 100 years. Their punishment a slow torment of waiting and watching as others complete the journey they cannot begin. Once the ferry is full, a huddled mass of silent, grieving shades, Charon pushes off from the shore. The journey across the Acheron is not long, but it feels like an eternity. The only sounds are the rhythmic creak of the pole and the soft lapping of the black water against the wood. No one speaks. The souls look back, but the shore they came from has already vanished into the impenetrable gloom. They are suspended between two darknesses, leaving a world they can't remember for a fate they cannot yet see. Charon is not evil. He is merely an instrument of the underworld's unyielding bureaucracy. He is the first true embodiment of the realm's laws, absolute, impartial, and deaf to emotion. Your wealth, your power, your goodness in life, none of it matters here. All that matters is whether the proper rite was observed. He is a grim gatekeeper, a cosmic toll collector whose existence serves as the first lesson to the dead. The rules of this new world are ancient, unbreakable, and they apply to everyone. As the skiff scrapes against the far shore, the souls disembark, stepping onto land that feels colder and more solid, yet somehow less real. The mist here is thicker, and the silence is deeper, broken only by a low, guttural growl that seems to vibrate through the very stones beneath their feet. Ahead, guarding the massive, shadowy gates of the underworld proper, sits the realm's most infamous resident, Cerberus. He is a beast of impossible scale, a monstrous hound whose form blots out the dim light. He has not one head, but three, each on a thick, serpentine neck. Their eyes glow with a faint, hellish light, and their muzzles drip with a black, venomous saliva. A mane of living snakes writhes and hisses around their shoulders, and his tail is not of fur, but is a long, barbed serpent that whips and twists in constant agitation. This is Hades' loyal pet, a creature of pure nightmare tasked with a singular, vital purpose. But his role is often misunderstood. Cerberus does not prevent souls from entering. In fact, he is strangely welcoming to the newly arrived shades, his growls softening, and his tails, all of them giving a slight, deceptive wag. He allows the dead to pass through the gates without issue, for they are where they belong. His true and terrible function is to ensure that once you are in, you never, ever leave. He is the ultimate guardian, the living embodiment of the underworld's finality. For the dead, he is a passive warden. But for any living mortal who dares to trespass, or any shade who dreams of escape, he is an engine of pure, unbridled fury. The three heads are said to be ever watchful, never sleeping all at once. They gaze in different directions, a trinity of vigilance. Some have speculated they represent the past, the present, and the future, all of which now belong to Hades. Others say they embody birth, youth, and old age, the stages of the life that each soul has now forfeited. Whatever their meaning, their presence is a constant, terrifying reminder that there is no escape. Yet, like so much in the underworld, even this horror operates by a set of rules. For all his ferocity, Cerberus has a weakness. The wise among the living knew that he could be placated. This is why some were buried with honey cakes alongside their fare for Charon. A sweet offering tossed to the beast could distract him long enough for a soul to slip by. Orpheus, the great musician, would later soothe him to sleep with the sound of his lyre, and the hero Heracles would overpower him with sheer brute force. But for the average soul, he is simply a presence to be passed, a silent and dreadful affirmation that they have truly arrived. He is the final lock on a door that only opens one way, his triple-throated growl the last, terrifying sound that separates the world of memory from the eternity of shadow. Once past the gates and the watchful eyes of Cerberus, the soul finds itself in a vast, open, and featureless plain. The air is motionless, and the silence is absolute. Ahead, the path diverges, splitting into 3 separate roads that disappear into the ever-present gloom. This is the place of judgment, the crossroads where the final fate of every soul is decided. Here, seated upon thrones of unadorned, gray stone, are the 3 great judges of the dead. These are not fearsome demons or capricious gods. They are the souls of men who, in their mortal lives, were renowned for their unwavering justice and wisdom. They are Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus, former kings whose reigns were so fair and whose laws were so sound that they were granted the eternal responsibility of arbitrating the lives of all who came after them. Rhadamanthus, known for his unbending integrity, is said to judge the souls from the eastern lands. Iacchus, once the pious king of Aegina, holds sway over the souls of the west, and Minos, the legendary king of Crete, sits as the chief justice, holding a golden scepter. He has the final, deciding vote in cases of great complexity or dispute. Together, they form a tribunal from which there is no appeal. There are no arguments here, no pleas for mercy, no lawyers to spin tales. The soul simply stands before the judges in silence. Their life is laid bare not by words, but by truth itself. Every action, every choice, every secret thought is exposed and weighed in the great, invisible scales of fate. The process is not one of anger or condemnation, but of dispassionate review. It is a cosmic audit, where the balance of a life is tallied with perfect, unflinching accuracy. Based on this silent, irrefutable evidence, the verdict is passed. It is not shouted, but simply decreed, a quiet and final decision that directs the soul down one of the 3 paths. For the vast majority, the ordinary, the unremarkable, those whose lives held a mix of good and bad, but tipped the scales in neither direction, the path leads straight ahead. Their destination is the Asphodel Meadows, a realm of neutral, shadowy existence. For the rare few, the heroes, the righteous, the great poets, and those initiated into the sacred mysteries, the verdict is a blessed one. Their path leads to the right, towards a glimmer of distant light. Their destination is the Elysian fields, a paradise of eternal peace and gentle joy. And for those whose lives were defined by great wickedness, tyrants, murderers, and those who dared to defy the gods themselves, the verdict is grim. Their path leads to the left, down a steep, dark road that echoes with distant screams. Their destination is Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, where punishments are eternal and tailored to the sinner's crimes. This moment of judgment is the true heart of the underworld's moral structure. It affirms that while death comes for everyone, the life you lived matters. It is a quiet, powerful testament to the Greek belief in a universe governed by order and consequence, where every soul is ultimately held accountable for the story it wrote for itself in the sunlit world above. For most souls, the journey ends here. Their lives, having been weighed and found neither glorious nor wicked, destine them for the middle path. They are the common dead, the vast and silent majority, and their eternal home is a place of profound and sorrowful neutrality, the asphodel meadows. As the soul walks forward from the seat of judgment, the ground softens into a fine, gray dust. The air becomes thick with a perpetual twilight, a sky that is neither dark nor light, where no sun or stars will ever shine again. Before them stretches a plain that seems to have no end, a vast and featureless landscape covered in pale, ghostly flowers. These are the asphodels, their gray-white petals limp and scentless, the only vegetation in this colorless realm. This is not a place of punishment. There is no pain here, no torment, no suffering, but there is also no joy. There is no laughter, no passion, no love, no ambition. The asphodel meadows are the embodiment of oblivion, a realm where the self is gently, inexorably erased. The souls who dwell here drift like smoke in a windless room. They are shades, mere echoes of the people they once were, their identities worn thin by eternity. Many of them have drunk from the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and its milky waters have washed their minds clean. Their memories of life are gone, or perhaps they flicker like a dying candle, too faint to grasp. A great warrior might still carry a phantom sword, but he has forgotten the thrill of battle. A queen may wear a ghostly crown, but she has no memory of her kingdom. They are hollow, performing the empty motions of a life they no longer recall. They are, as the myths describe, witless. They recognize each other, but without emotion. They cluster in silent groups, their conversations nothing more than the squeaking of bats, meaningless and without substance. When the hero Odysseus visited this realm, he found the shades to be insubstantial and without consciousness. Only when he allowed them to drink the blood of a sacrificed ram did their memories and personalities briefly return, and they would weep for the world of sunlight they had lost. But the moment passed, and they would drift back into their serene, dreamless state. Imagine walking among them. The air is cool and still. The shades flutter past you, their eyes vacant, their movements aimless and slow. They do not see you. They do not see anything. They are caught in an endless, quiet dream, an undisturbed peace that is also a kind of damnation. This was the fate the average Greek expected after death, and it was a melancholy one. It wasn't the fear of hellfire that haunted them, but the fear of insignificance, of being forgotten not only by the living, but by oneself. The asphodel meadows are the quiet heart of the Greek underworld. It is the destination for the farmer, the merchant, the soldier, the mother, all those who lived and died without attracting the particular notice of the gods. Their reward and their punishment. is to simply cease to matter. They exist, but they are no longer truly there. It is a peace so profound it erases you completely, a gentle, gray, and unending twilight of the soul. But not all souls were destined for the gray plains of asphodel. For a select few, the verdict of the judges directed them down the path to the right, a path that seemed to slope gently upward, toward a soft and distant glow. This was the road to Elysium, or the Elysian Fields, the paradise of the underworld, a reward for a life lived with extraordinary virtue, courage, or piety. To step into Elysium was to leave the gloom of the underworld behind entirely. It was a realm that had its own sun and its own stars, forever bathing the landscape in a warm, golden light. A gentle west wind, the zephyr, perpetually drifted through the air, carrying the scent of flowers and the soft sound of music. There were no ghostly asphodels here. Instead, there were lush green meadows, groves of fragrant trees, and clear, sparkling streams. Elysium was an eternal springtime, a place of serene and perfect beauty where the blessed could enjoy a peaceful and joyous afterlife. The inhabitants of Elysium were not the witless, fluttering shades of asphodel. They were the souls of the great heroes, the renowned poets, the righteous kings, and those who had been initiated into the sacred Eleusinian mysteries. They retained their memories, their personalities, and the vigor they had possessed in life. They were whole again, free from the pains and sorrows of their mortal existence, but still recognizably themselves. They spent their days in pleasant, leisurely pursuits. You might see warriors practicing their athletic skills in the fields, not for war, but for the pure joy of movement. Musicians would sit under shady trees, their lyres filling the air with beautiful melodies. Philosophers would walk together in quiet conversation, and feasts were held where nectar was poured and laughter echoed softly. It was an afterlife of contentment, where the noblest pleasures of mortal life could be enjoyed for eternity, without hardship or struggle. In some versions of the myth, Elysium was ruled not by Hades, but by the Titan Cronus, the father he had once overthrown. Freed from his prison in Tartarus, the old king presided over this golden realm of heroes, his own turbulent past redeemed by an eternity of peace. Within Elysium, there was said to be an even more exclusive paradise, the Isle of the Blessed. This was the final destination for souls who had been deemed worthy of Elysium 3 times. After their first death, they could choose to be reborn into the mortal world. If they lived a righteous life 2 more times, they earned passage to this ultimate heaven, a place of unimaginable bliss and honor. Elysium was the great hope in the Greek conception of the afterlife. It was a testament to the belief that a life of excellence and honor would be rewarded. Yet, it was a distant hope for most. The path was narrow, and very few were chosen to walk it. It was a paradise reserved for the exceptional, a sunlit island in the vast, dark ocean of the underworld, a quiet and beautiful reminder that even in the realm of the dead, true greatness could never be entirely extinguished. There is a third path leading from the seat of judgment, the one that veers to the left. It is a road that slopes steeply downward into an ever-deepening darkness. The air grows cold, and from the depths below, faint sounds can be heard, not the gentle music of Elysium, but the distant echo of screams and the clanking of chains. This is the path to Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, a prison for the most wicked souls and the greatest enemies of the gods. Tartarus is not merely a region of Hades' realm. It is a separate entity. A great void as far beneath the earth as the heavens are above it. If you were to drop an anvil from the surface of the world, it would fall for 9 days and 9 nights before reaching the bottom of this abyss. It is the cosmic cellar of the universe, a place of absolute darkness and confinement. The prison itself is designed to be inescapable. It is surrounded by the Phlegethon, the river of fire whose flames burn without consuming, providing a horrifying, flickering light but no warmth. Its gates are forged of solid bronze, and some say adamant, the hardest substance in existence. These gates are guarded by the Erinyes, or the Furies, terrible goddesses of vengeance with snakes for hair and eyes that weep tears of blood. They are the wardens of this place, ensuring that the punishments within are carried out without cease and without mercy. This is the destination for the truly awful. The souls sent to Tartarus are not common sinners, but those who have committed crimes of a staggering scale. Tyrants who bathed in the blood of their people, men who murdered their own kin, and worst of all, those who displayed unforgivable hubris, the arrogant pride that led them to challenge the gods themselves. Here, the punishment is designed to suit the crime, an eternal and often ironic torment that reflects the nature of the sinner's transgression. But Tartarus is more than just a hell for mortals. It is, first and foremost, a godly prison. Its most famous inhabitants are the Titans, the old generation of deities who were overthrown by Zeus and the Olympians in the great war known as the Titanomachy. After their defeat, they were cast into the pit and imprisoned there for all time, their immense power contained in the one place from which even they could not escape. To be sent to Tartarus was the most dreadful fate a soul could imagine. It was not the gentle oblivion of asphodel or the serene joy of Elysium. It was an eternity of conscious suffering, a cycle of pain and despair from which there was no relief and no end. It was a place where justice was absolute, and mercy was a forgotten word. Let us now turn our gaze to the inhabitants of this dreadful pit, for their stories are among the most powerful warnings in all of Greek mythology. One of the first figures you might see in the flickering light of the Phlegethon is Tantalus, a king whose punishment has become a timeless symbol of temptation without fulfillment. In life, Tantalus was uniquely privileged. He was a son of Zeus and a wealthy king, but his greatest honor was the favor of the gods themselves. He was one of the very few mortals ever invited to dine at their table on Mount Olympus, to share their divine food, ambrosia, and their life-giving drink, nectar. He was privy to their secrets, their laughter, and their power. But this closeness bred a terrible arrogance in his heart. He began to see himself not as their guest, but as their equal. To test their famed omniscience, he devised a plan of unspeakable cruelty. He invited the gods to a banquet in his own palace, and, for the main course, he committed an atrocity. He murdered his own young son. Pelops dismembered his body and cooked him into a stew, which he then served to his divine guests. He watched them, a smug smile on his face, waiting to see if they would discover his monstrous deception. They knew instantly. All but one, that is. Demeter, her mind clouded with grief over her lost daughter Persephone, unknowingly ate a piece of the boy's shoulder. The other gods were filled with revulsion and fury. Zeus, in his rage, struck Tantalus down and commanded the Fates to restore the boy to life. They gathered the pieces of Pelops from the cauldron, and he was made whole again, his missing shoulder replaced with a miraculous one carved from pure ivory. For his crime, a violation of the sacred laws of hospitality, kinship, and piety, Tantalus was condemned to the deepest part of Tartarus, where his punishment was a masterpiece of ironic cruelty. He was made to stand for eternity in a pool of cool, clear water that reached his chin. He is parched, tormented by a burning thirst. But whenever he bows his head to drink, the water recedes into the earth, leaving only dry, cracked mud at his feet. Directly above him, the branches of a magnificent fruit tree hang heavy with the most tempting produce, ripe figs, sweet pomegranates, glistening apples, and luscious pears. He is racked with a gnawing hunger, but whenever he reaches up a trembling hand to pluck a piece of fruit, a gust of wind, sent by the gods, whips the branches just beyond his grasp. And so he stands for all time, trapped in an endless cycle of hope and despair. He is forever surrounded by the very things that could save him: water to quench his thirst, food to ease his hunger, but he can never, ever partake. His torment is not just physical, but psychological. It is the eternal proximity of relief that makes his suffering so absolute. From his name, we get the word to tantalize, to torment someone with the sight of something they cannot have. His fate is a chilling, eternal reminder of the price of hubris and the folly of testing the gods. Not far from the ever-thirsting Tantalus, you would witness another of Tartarus's famous prisoners, a man locked in a struggle, not of temptation, but of pure, unending, and meaningless effort. This is Sisyphus, a king whose cleverness in life earned him an eternity of futility in death. Sisyphus was the founder and king of Corinth, and he was widely known as the craftiest of all mortals. His mind was a labyrinth of schemes and tricks, and he believed himself cleverer than anyone, including the gods. His downfall came not from a single act of cruelty, but from a lifetime of hubris, repeatedly using his wit to defy divine authority. His first major transgression was against Zeus himself. After witnessing the king of the gods abduct a river nymph named Aegina, Sisyphus saw an opportunity. He reported the kidnapping to Aegina's father, the river god Asopus, but not out of a sense of justice. He did it in exchange for a gift, a permanent freshwater spring for his city of Corinth. Zeus was enraged that a mortal would dare to expose his affairs for personal gain. As punishment, Zeus sent Thanatos, the personification of death, to chain Sisyphus and drag him to the underworld. But Sisyphus, ever the trickster, feigned innocence and curiosity. He asked Thanatos to demonstrate how the shackles worked, and when the god obliged, Sisyphus snapped the chains shut, imprisoning death itself. With Thanatos bound, no one on earth could die. The old and sick lingered in agony, and battles were fought with no casualties. The natural order fell into chaos until Ares, the god of war, grew frustrated by the lack of finality in his conflicts and personally descended to free Thanatos. Even then, Sisyphus had one more trick. Before he was finally taken to the underworld, he secretly instructed his wife to neglect his burial rites. Once he arrived before the throne of Hades and Persephone, he began to complain bitterly that he, a king, had been disrespected, left unburied and unmourned. He pleaded with the queen to allow him to return to the surface for just 3 days to arrange a proper funeral. Taking pity on him, Persephone agreed. But once Sisyphus was back in the sunlit world, he reneged on his promise, celebrating his victory over death and living to a ripe old age, until Hermes himself was finally dispatched to drag his soul back to the underworld for good. For a man who spent his life trying to cheat the system and escape his fate, the gods devised a punishment of exquisite irony. Sisyphus was condemned to an eternity of pointless labor. His task is to push a colossal boulder up the side of a steep hill. He strains with every muscle, his body slick with sweat, his feet slipping on the dusty ground. The great stone is heavy beyond belief, and the summit is always just in view. But in the final moment, just as he is about to crest the hill, the boulder's immense weight overpowers him. It slips from his grasp and thunders all the way back down to the bottom of the valley. Sisyphus can only watch it go, his breath catching in his chest, before he must wearily descend and begin the entire agonizing process all over again. His punishment is the embodiment of futility. It is a perfect torment for the man who thought his cleverness could grant him a permanent victory. Now, his existence is an endless cycle of intense effort with zero accomplishment, a reminder that for all his schemes, the final authority of the gods, and the weight of his own choices, could never truly be outwitted. The torments of Tartarus were reserved for those whose crimes were an affront to the very fabric of cosmic law. Alongside Tantalus and Sisyphus, other figures endure punishments equally as grim, each a lesson in the consequences of mortal arrogance. One such figure is Ixion, a king whose story is a chilling tale of mercy repaid with betrayal. In life, Ixion committed the first ever act of kinslaying, murdering his own father-in-law. It was a crime so heinous that he was ostracized by all of humanity, a pariah wandering the earth. Yet, in a moment of extraordinary compassion, Zeus himself took pity on the king. He invited Ixion to Olympus, purified him of his sin, and welcomed him as a guest among the gods. But, like Tantalus before him, Ixion mistook this divine mercy for license. He became consumed with a brazen lust for Hera, the queen of the gods, and Zeus's own wife. Seeing the impure thoughts in Ixion's heart, Zeus decided to test him. He fashioned a cloud, Nephilah, into a perfect likeness of his wife, and sent it to Ixion. The foolish king, blinded by his desire, did not hesitate. He coupled with the cloud clone, and afterward boasted loudly that he had seduced the queen of Olympus. For this ultimate act of hubris and ingratitude, Zeus's mercy vanished. He struck Ixion with a thunderbolt, casting him down into Tartarus. There, Hermes bound him to a great, fiery wheel. For all eternity, Ixion is tied to this wheel as it spins endlessly, wreathed in flame. His punishment, a constant, dizzying reminder of his lust and betrayal. He is a testament to the fact that even divine forgiveness, if scorned, will be replaced by divine wrath. Yet, even these great mortal sinners are dwarfed by the other prisoners of the pit. For the primary purpose of Tartarus was to serve as a prison for cosmic enemies, beings of immense power who once threatened the rule of Olympus. Here, in the deepest darkness, lie the vanquished Titans. These were the old gods, the powerful children of Uranus and Gaia who ruled the cosmos long before Zeus was born. For 10 years, a brutal war known as the Titanomachy raged between them and the younger Olympian gods. In the end, led by Zeus and his thunderbolts, the Olympians were victorious. To ensure his reign would be absolute and unchallenged, Zeus cast the defeated Titans down into the inescapable abyss of Tartarus. Here they remain, their colossal forms chained in the gloom, their primordial power contained. Their presence makes Tartarus not just a hell for human souls, but the ultimate high-security prison for defeated gods. Their fall from rulers of the universe to prisoners in its basement is the ultimate expression of Olympian power and the final, unchangeable verdict on the war that shaped the cosmos. Having surveyed the fates of the souls, the blessed, the forgotten, and the damned, we now turn our attention to the master of this entire domain. He is a figure cloaked in shadow and silence, a god whose name became synonymous with his realm, a king almost universally feared and profoundly misunderstood. This is Hades. It is essential, as we approach his throne, to shed the modern images of a horned, fiery devil. Hades was not the Greek version of Satan. He was not a force of pure evil, nor was he a tempter of mortals who reveled in their damnation. He was simply the king. His role was not to cause death, a duty that fell to the separate personification of death. Thanatos, but to rule over the dead once they arrived. He was the solemn, unyielding, and impeccably fair warden of the largest and most populous kingdom in the cosmos. Unlike his tempestuous brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, who constantly interfered in the lives of mortals, Hades rarely left his domain. He had no interest in the petty squabbles of humanity or the dramatic politics of Olympus. He was quiet, brooding, and relentlessly focused on his work managing the logistics of eternity. In a pantheon defined by chaotic passions, Hades was a figure of startling consistency. He did not cheat, he did not rage, and he did not break his own laws. His power was not flashy. It was absolute and eternal, an enduring presence that anchored the natural order of life and death. So great was the fear and respect he commanded that mortals avoided speaking his name aloud, fearing it might draw his attention. His proper name, Hades, means the unseen one, a fitting title for a god who ruled a hidden kingdom and possessed a helmet of invisibility that allowed him to move undetected, even among his fellow gods. Instead, they often used euphemisms. The most common of these was Pluton, which means the rich one, or the giver of wealth. This name was a recognition that all the treasures of the earth, the gold, the silver, the precious gems, and even the fertile soil from which crops grew originated from his domain beneath the ground. In this light, he was not a god of doom, but of hidden abundance, the quiet source of all things valuable. His palace stands at the heart of the realm, a vast and silent fortress of black, volcanic stone. Within its halls, there are no sounds of music or laughter, only the faint, whispering echoes of the shades that drift through its corridors. At its center, seated upon a throne of polished obsidian, Hades reigns. He is often depicted with a dark beard, a regal but stern expression, holding a scepter or a two-pronged bident, a symbol of his authority. He is not a monster. He is a king, a lonely and tireless administrator who governs the inevitable with a quiet, somber dignity that few ever understood. Hades' journey to the throne of the underworld begins, like that of all his siblings, in darkness. He was the firstborn son of the great Titans, Cronus and Rhea. Cronus, the reigning king of the cosmos, lived in the shadow of a terrible prophecy that he, like his own father, would be overthrown by his children. To prevent this fate, he devised a simple, monstrous solution as each of his children was born. He swallowed them whole: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Poseidon, and finally Hades himself, all vanished into the belly of their father, trapped in a living prison. Hades, being the eldest son, was the first to suffer this fate, a grim foreshadowing of the realm of darkness he would one day command. For years, they remained there, until their mother, Rhea, finally managed to save her youngest child, Zeus, by tricking Cronus with a swaddled stone. Zeus grew up in secret and, upon reaching adulthood, returned to challenge his father. He forced Cronus to regurgitate his siblings, and they emerged into the light, fully grown and ready for war, because Hades had been the first to be swallowed. He was the last to be released. A strange and poetic symmetry that made him both the eldest and the lastborn of the original Olympians. What followed was the Titanomachy, a cataclysmic 10-year war that pitted the new gods against the old. Hades fought bravely alongside his brothers and sisters. During the war, the Cyclopes, freed from their own imprisonment by Zeus, forged magnificent weapons for the three brothers. To Zeus, they gave the thunderbolt; to Poseidon, the trident; and to Hades, they gifted the helm of darkness, a helmet that rendered its wearer completely invisible. After their victory, when the Titans were cast into the eternal prison of Tartarus, the three brothers had to divide the cosmos among themselves. They decided not by right or by age, but by chance. They cast lots. Zeus drew the sky, becoming the king of the gods and ruler of Olympus. Poseidon drew the sea, claiming dominion over all the world's waters. And Hades drew the underworld, the vast and gloomy realm beneath the earth. Later, myths would sometimes frame this as an unlucky draw, a banishment to a lesser kingdom. But that was not the original telling. Hades was not cast down. He simply received his share. His kingdom was equal in stature to those of his brothers, and he accepted his role without protest or complaint. He did not need the spectacle of Olympus or the tumult of the seas. His nature was suited to the quiet, unchanging, and absolute authority of the land of the dead. And so, he descended into his kingdom, taking up his throne not as a loser in a cosmic lottery, but as a king claiming his rightful domain. For ages, Hades ruled his dark kingdom alone. The halls of his obsidian palace were silent, and his throne, though mighty, was solitary. But from the depths of his shadowy realm, he looked up into the world of light and saw a goddess who was his complete opposite. This was Persephone, the beloved daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. Persephone, sometimes called Kor, the maiden, was the very embodiment of spring. She was a figure of life, youth, and innocence, her laughter like the sound of running water, her presence causing flowers to bloom. She spent her days in the sun-drenched meadows of the living world, gathering wildflowers with her nymph companions, unaware of the lonely king who watched her from below. Hades became captivated by her, and a deep desire grew within him, a desire for a queen to share his silent, sprawling kingdom. Knowing that Demeter would never consent to such a marriage, Hades did not ask. One day, as Persephone was picking flowers in a meadow, her attention was drawn to a single, breathtakingly beautiful narcissus, a flower placed there by Gaia at the request of Hades to lure her away from her friends. As she reached down to pluck it, the earth trembled violently. A great chasm tore open in the ground, and from the darkness emerged Hades in his magnificent, terrifying chariot, drawn by 4 immortal black stallions. Before Persephone could scream for help, the Dark King swept her into his arms, turned his chariot around, and plunged back into the chasm, the earth sealing itself behind them as if it had never opened. Her cries were faint, swallowed by the ground, but they were heard by her mother. Demeter was frantic. When she could not find her daughter, a terrible grief overtook her. With a burning torch in each hand, she began to wander the earth, day and night, forgoing food, drink, and rest, calling out her daughter's name to a world that gave no answer. As the goddess of the harvest, her sorrow had a devastating effect on the mortal world. In her grief, she refused to allow anything to grow. The grain would not sprout, the trees would not bear fruit, and the flowers withered and died. The vibrant green of the world faded to a barren brown. Famine swept across the land. Mortals began to starve, and their desperate prayers and sacrifices to the gods went unanswered, for Demeter would not relent. The very survival of humanity was at stake. This drew the attention of Zeus and the other Olympians, who realized that if all the mortals died, there would be no one left to worship them or offer them sacrifices. It was not out of compassion, but out of cosmic necessity, that Zeus finally understood he had to intervene. He sent messenger after messenger to plead with Demeter, but her response was always the same. She would not let the earth bloom again until her daughter was returned to her. And so, the king of the gods had no choice but to turn his attention downward, to the silent king who had just claimed his queen. Forced to act, Zeus sent his swiftest messenger, Hermes, down into the shadowy depths of the underworld. Hermes delivered the ultimatum to Hades. Persephone must be returned to her mother, or the world of mortals would perish, and Olympus along with it. Hades, ever the pragmatist, understood he could not defy a direct command from Zeus, nor could he rule a kingdom of the dead if there were no living left to die. He agreed to let Persephone go, but with one ancient, unbreakable condition. The law of the fates dictated that anyone who consumed food or drink in the underworld was bound to remain there for eternity. Before Persephone ascended in Hermes' chariot, Hades, with a quiet and clever gesture, offered her a single, ripe pomegranate, perhaps out of hunger after her time in the dark, or perhaps not fully understanding the consequences. Persephone ate a few of the glistening, ruby-red seeds. In most tellings, it was 6 seeds, just enough. When she was reunited with her mother, Demeter's joy was immense, and the earth began to bloom once more. But when it was revealed that Persephone had tasted the fruit of the underworld, the fate's law could not be ignored. A final compromise was struck. For each seed she had eaten, Persephone would have to spend 1 month of the year below, as the queen of the underworld. For the remaining months, she would be free to return to the world above. And thus, the seasons were born. When Persephone is with her mother, the earth is green and fertile, giving us spring and summer. When she descends to her husband's realm, Demeter mourns, and the world enters the cold, barren months of autumn and winter. But this story is not simply about a victim and her tragic fate. Over time, Persephone underwent a profound transformation. She was no longer just Kore, the innocent maiden. In the underworld, she became a queen in her own right, a calm, firm, and powerful ruler. She was not a prisoner pining for escape. She sat on a throne beside Hades, his equal in title and authority. The myths show her not as a sad, kidnapped girl, but as a formidable goddess who guided the dead, presided over judgments, and was revered by all who entered her realm. She became a bridge between two worlds, understanding both the light of life and the finality of death. This duality made her one of the most compelling figures in the entire pantheon. Mortals prayed to her not just as the daughter of the harvest, but as the queen of the dead, asking for mercy and safe passage for their loved ones. In the sacred Eleusinian mysteries, one of the most important religious cults in ancient Greece, she was a central figure, representing not just seasonal change, but the promise of rebirth and a blessed afterlife. Persephone's journey is one from innocence to strength, from being taken to taking control. She is the flower that blooms in the sun, but also the one that thrives in the darkness. She is the embodiment of life's cycle, that from decay comes new growth, and that even in the deepest shadow, a queen can find her power. The union of Hades and Persephone began with an act of violence and sorrow, a story that seems, by modern standards, irredeemably dark. And yet, in the strange and complex world of Greek mythology, their relationship evolved into something unexpected, a functional and weirdly stable marriage. In fact, when compared to the constant drama and infidelity that plagued the halls of Olympus, the quiet bond between the king and queen of the underworld was one of the most enduring partnerships in the entire pantheon. At the heart of this stability was the character of Hades himself. Unlike his brothers Zeus and Poseidon, whose endless affairs produced a host of divine and mortal children and incurred the constant wrath of their wives, Hades was remarkably faithful. In all the myths, he is perhaps the only major god who does not cheat or stray. His love for his queen, though it began in a strange and possessive form, was singular. His realm was enough for him, his crown was enough for him, and his queen was enough for him. He did not rage, he did not wander, and he did not crave the spotlight of the world above. This steadfastness provided a foundation for Persephone's own power to grow. She was not a subjugated bride or a lonely captive. In the myths, she is depicted as a true ruler in her own right, sharing the throne and the responsibilities of the kingdom. She sat beside Hades, not behind him, an equal partner in their somber domain. Mortals and gods alike respected her authority. She was the dreaded queen of the underworld, a figure who understood the mysteries of death and held power over its inhabitants. Together, they formed a balanced and effective partnership. Hades represented the unyielding law and eternal structure of the realm, while Persephone, who traveled between the worlds of the living and the dead, embodied the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth. Their marriage was a symbol of the universe's necessary balance, that life cannot exist without death, and that even in the darkest of places, a unique kind of harmony can be found. The contrast with this marriage of Zeus and Hera is stark. While Olympus was filled with Hera's vengeful plots and Zeus's narrow escapes, the palace of the underworld was quiet. There were no scandals, no spurned lovers, no illegitimate children. There was only the silent, shared duty of two powerful beings ruling their kingdom together. It is one of the great ironies of the myths that the most functional divine marriage was the one founded in the land of the dead. A quiet testament to the idea that stability can be found not in passionate fire, but in the cool, steady darkness. The laws of the underworld were absolute. The living were forbidden from entering, and the dead were forbidden from leaving. It was a one-way passage, a final journey from which there was no return. Yet, a handful of mortals, driven by extraordinary love, divine quests, or sheer heroic will, dared to defy this sacred rule. They journeyed into the darkness and, even more remarkably, returned. The most famous, and perhaps most tragic, of these visitors was Orpheus, the legendary musician whose song could charm the very gods. Orpheus was the greatest poet and musician in all of mythology. When he played his lyre and sang, wild beasts would lie down peacefully at his feet. Trees would bend their branches to listen, and even the rocks themselves would soften and move. His heart belonged to a beautiful nymph named Eurydice, and their love was as perfect as his music. But on their wedding day, a shadow fell upon their joy. As Eurydice wandered through a meadow, she was pursued by a satyr. Fleeing from him, she stumbled upon a viper hidden in the grass. The snake struck her heel, and its venom sent her soul spiraling down into the underworld. Orpheus was consumed by a grief so profound that his music turned from joyous melodies to heartbreaking laments. The world wept with him. But it was not enough. Unwilling to accept his loss, he made a decision no mortal had ever dared to make out of love alone. He would descend into the land of the dead and bring his wife back. With his lyre in hand, he found the hidden entrance to the underworld and began his journey. As he played his sorrowful music, the realm itself seemed to pause and listen. He came to the river Styx, where the grim ferryman Charon, moved by the beauty of the song, allowed him to board his skiff without demanding payment. His music lulled the monstrous three-headed Cerberus to sleep, allowing him to pass through the gates unchallenged. As he walked deeper into the realm, his song echoed through the plains. The shades of the dead wept silent tears. The eternal punishments of Tartarus came to a halt. Tantalus forgot his thirst. The wheel of Ixion stopped spinning, and even Sisyphus sat down to rest upon his boulder, listening to the music. Finally, Orpheus stood before the throne of Hades and Persephone. He played his lyre and sang of his love for Eurydice, of the joy she brought to the world, and of the crushing emptiness her absence had left behind. He did not demand her return. He pleaded for it, his music weaving a tapestry of such pure and beautiful sorrow that even the cold heart of Persephone, the queen of the dead, was touched. Hades himself, the implacable king, found his resolve faltering. They agreed to his request. Eurydice could return to the world of the living, but on one solemn condition. Orpheus must lead the way out, and Eurydice would follow behind him. He was forbidden from looking back at her until they had both completely passed out of the underworld and into the full light of the sun. If he turned around too soon, she would be lost to him forever. Filled with a desperate hope, Orpheus agreed. He began the long, silent climb back towards the surface, his heart pounding with every step. He could not hear Eurydice's footsteps, for shades make no sound. The silence was agonizing, and as he neared the exit, a terrible doubt began to creep into his mind. Was she still there? Had the gods tricked him? Was this all just a cruel joke? The need to know, to see her face just once, became unbearable. At the very last moment, as he stepped out of the cave into the bright sunlight, he forgot the warning. He turned around. He saw her for a fleeting instant, a beautiful, sorrowful shadow just behind him, still shrouded in the darkness of the cavern. Her arms reached for him, but she was already being pulled back, her form dissolving like smoke. He heard her whisper a single, final farewell, and then she was gone. Orpheus had been tested, and his faith had failed. In the end, it was Hades who had kept his promise. There was no trickery, only the rules. And Orpheus had broken them. Not all who sought the underworld did so for love. Some journeyed there seeking knowledge. For the dead, in their vast and silent kingdom, held the secrets of the past and the threads of the future. The great hero, Odysseus, cunning and resourceful, was one such visitor. His journey was not a rescue mission, but a grim errand, a necessary step on his long and weary road home from the Trojan War. On his travels, Odysseus was instructed by the sorceress Circe that to learn the way back to his beloved Ithaca, he must consult the spirit of the blind prophet, Tiresias. To do this, he didn't have to fully descend into the depths of the realm like Orpheus. Instead, he sailed to the very edge of the world, to a land shrouded in perpetual mist, where he performed a solemn and ancient ritual known as the Nakia. Following Circe's instructions, he dug a trench with his sword. Into it, he poured libations to all the dead, first a mixture of milk and honey, then sweet wine, and finally water, sprinkling white barley over it all. He prayed to the shades, promising them his finest heifer upon his return to Ithaca. Then he sacrificed 2 black sheep, holding their heads over the trench so their dark blood would drain into the pit. The scent of the blood was a powerful lure. The shades of the dead began to emerge from the gloom, fluttering towards the trench like moths to a flame. They were a pathetic and witless crowd, desperate for a taste of the blood that would grant them a fleeting moment of consciousness and memory. Odysseus, his heart filled with a mix of pity and fear, had to draw his sharp sword to hold them back, saving the offering for the one soul he had come to see. Soon, the spirit of the prophet Tiresias appeared. After drinking the blood, his mind cleared, and he delivered his prophecy. He warned Odysseus of the trials to come, of the wrath of the god Poseidon, and of the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios, which his men must not harm if they ever wished to see home again. Once Tiresias had spoken, Odysseus allowed other spirits to approach the trench. The first was his own mother, Anticlea. He had not even known she was dead, and seeing her shade brought him to tears. She drank the blood and told him how she had died of a broken heart, waiting for his return. Their conversation was filled with sorrow, a painful reminder of the cost of his long absence. Then came the ghosts of his fallen comrades from Troy. He spoke with Agamemnon, the great king, who told the bitter tale of his murder at the hands of his own wife. He spoke with other heroes, sharing stories and grief. Finally, he saw the shade of the mighty Achilles, the greatest warrior of them all. Odysseus tried to comfort him, saying that he must surely be a great king among the dead. Achilles' reply is perhaps the most poignant summary of the Greek view of the afterlife ever spoken. He told Odysseus not to speak soothingly of death. "I would rather," he said, "be a slave on earth to a poor, landless farmer than be the king over all these perished souls." It was a devastating admission, even for the greatest of heroes. The most glorious fate in the underworld was an unbearable shadow compared to the humblest existence in the world of light and life. Odysseus's journey gave him the knowledge he needed, but it also gave him a profound and sorrowful understanding of the finality of death. There was one final mortal visitor to the underworld, a hero whose journey was unlike any other. He came not for love, like Orpheus, nor for knowledge, like Odysseus. He came on a quest, armed not with a lyre or a sacrificial knife, but with pure, indomitable strength. This was Heracles, the greatest of all Greek heroes, and his purpose in the underworld was not to plead or to bargain, but to conquer, for his 12th and final labor, a task designed by his nemesis king Eurystheus to be impossible. Heracles was commanded to descend into Hades, capture the monstrous three-headed hound Cerberus, and bring him back to the land of the living. It was an ultimate test of his power and courage, a direct confrontation with death itself. Unlike other mortals, Heracles prepared for his descent. He traveled to Eleusis and had himself initiated into the sacred mysteries, learning the secrets of the goddesses Demeter and Persephone to ensure his safe passage through their realm. He approached his task not just with brawn, but with the proper ritual respect. When he arrived at the entrance to the underworld, he did not need to charm his way past its guardians. The sheer force of his presence was enough. The shades of the dead were said to have fled in terror before him. When he encountered the ferryman Charon, the old man was so intimidated by the hero's divine aura that he ferried him across the river without question. Heracles did not sneak through the realm. He strode directly to the obsidian palace and stood before the throne of Hades himself. In a show of respect for the king's authority, he did not demand Cerberus. He asked for permission to borrow the great hound to complete his labor. Hades, impressed by the hero's courage and protocol, agreed. But he gave Heracles a challenge. Befitting his strength, he could take the beast, but only if he could subdue it without using any weapons. Heracles accepted the terms. He found Cerberus at the gates, and what followed was a battle of legendary proportions. Draped in the impenetrable hide of the Nemean lion, Heracles wrestled with the monstrous dog. Cerberus thrashed and snarled, his 3 heads snapping, his serpent tail lashing out to bite. But the hero's grip was like iron. He wrapped his massive arms around the beast's necks and squeezed, slowly and inexorably, until the great hound, choked and overpowered, finally whimpered in submission. Heracles then dragged the struggling, 3-headed monster up from the darkness and into the world of sunlight, a sight so terrifying that King Eurystheus, upon seeing it, leaped into a large storage jar to hide. Having successfully completed his labor and proven his point, Heracles, ever honorable, returned the frightened Cerberus to his master in the underworld, restoring the guardian to his rightful post. Heracles' journey is unique. He is the only hero to have bested the underworld through sheer power. He faced death not as a sorrowful end or a source of secrets, but as an adversary to be wrestled and overcome. His triumph represents the ultimate heroic ideal that through strength and courage, a mortal could stare into the abyss and emerge, for a time, victorious. The underworld was more than just a kingdom of shades and rulers. It was also home to some of the oldest and most feared powers in the cosmos. These were primal forces of justice and retribution, and none were more terrifying than the Erinyes, more commonly known as the Furies. They were not the children of Olympians. The Furies were born from a foundational act of cosmic violence, springing from the earth where the blood of the sky, God, Uranus, fell when he was mutilated by his son, Cronus. This ancient origin placed them outside the neat hierarchy of Olympus. They were not loyal to Zeus. They were loyal to the sanctity of natural law itself, and their purpose was to punish the most heinous of crimes. Their appearance was the stuff of nightmares. They were depicted as hideous, winged hags, with writhing snakes for hair and eyes that wept tears of blood. They carried brass-studded scourges, or torches, and their very presence was enough to drive a mortal mad. The Furies were the agents of vengeance for crimes that tore at the fabric of family and society, while the gods of Olympus might punish mortals for disrespect or impiety. The Furies were concerned with violations of a more personal and sacred nature. Their primary targets were those guilty of kinslaying the murder of a mother, father, or sibling. They also relentlessly pursued anyone who broke a sacred oath. They were the divine personification of a guilty conscience, a supernatural force that ensured certain transgressions could never be escaped. Their method was not a swift execution, but a slow, psychological torment. They would hound their chosen victim across the earth, their whispers echoing in their ears, their terrifying forms appearing in their dreams. They would drive the guilty to the very brink of insanity, a constant, inescapable reminder of their crime. The most famous story involving them is that of Orestes, who was pursued relentlessly after he killed his mother, Clytemnestra, to avenge his father, Agamemnon. The Furies chased him across the Greek world, giving him no peace. While they could operate in the world of the living, their home was in the underworld, often described as standing guard at the entrance to Tartarus. There, they oversaw the eternal punishments of the damned, their presence a guarantee that the torments would never cease. Yet, there was an evolution to their story. In the Athenian version of Orestes' myth, the goddess Athena intervenes. She establishes the first ever murder trial and, after the verdict, acquits Orestes. She placates the Furies' rage. She offers them a new, honored role as protectors of the city of Athens, guardians of justice rather than pure vengeance. In this new capacity, they were given a new name, the Eumenides, which means the kindly ones. It was a respectful title, meant to appease their terrible power. This story reflects a shift in Greek thought, from a world of blood feuds and primal revenge to one of civic law and reasoned justice. But even as the kindly ones, they never lost their edge, a quiet reminder that beneath the order of the city, the ancient and terrible power of the Furies still watched and waited. To truly understand the Greek conception of the underworld, we must make a crucial distinction. Hades, for all his power, was not the god of death. He did not travel to the mortal world to claim souls. That solemn duty belonged to another, a quieter and more gentle deity named Thanatos. Thanatos was the personification of a peaceful, non-violent death. His name was the Greek word for death itself, and he was the one who came to a mortal when their thread of life, spun by the fates, had run its course. He was often depicted as a winged youth, sometimes with a sword sheathed at his side, used to cut a lock of the dying person's hair to dedicate them to the underworld. He was not a figure of terror, but of inevitability. He was stern, but gentle. His touch was cold, but it was not cruel. He represented the quiet passing at the end of a long life, not the violent chaos of the battlefield. Thanatos was not alone in his work. He had a twin brother named Hypnos, the personification of sleep. The two were inseparable, the children of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night. They were said to dwell together in a dark cave in the deepest part of the underworld, a place where the sun never shone and through which the silent river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, flowed. Hypnos was a benevolent god, a friend to mortals who offered them rest from their labors and respite from their sorrows each night. His power was immense. Even the mighty Zeus could not resist his influence. He could drift over the land and sea, pouring slumber from his horn or touching mortals with his magical branch, granting them dreams and easing their minds. The twinship of sleep and death was a concept central to Greek thought. They saw sleep as the little death, a temporary journey into a state of oblivion that mirrored the final journey every soul must take. Each night, when Hypnos claimed you, you were practicing for the day when his brother, Thanatos, would come for you. Their work was often intertwined. When a great hero died, it was sometimes said that Hypnos and Thanatos would appear together as winged youths to carry the body away from the battlefield, bearing it gently back to its homeland for a proper burial. They were two sides of the same coin, one offered temporary release, the other a permanent one. Their presence in the mythology removed the act of dying from the realm of violence and placed it into a context of quiet, natural transition. When your time came, it was not a monster who arrived, but a winged god whose touch was as gentle and as final as falling into a deep and dreamless sleep. Beyond the gods who ruled the underworld and the beings who served it, there were other, older powers who walked the boundaries between realms. The most mysterious and potent of these was Hecate, the goddess of magic, witchcraft, crossroads, and the night. Hecate was a Titan, one of the generation of gods who preceded the Olympians. Unlike most of her kin, she sided with Zeus during the Great War, and, as a reward for her allegiance, Zeus allowed her to retain all of her ancient powers and privileges. This made her a unique and deeply respected figure, a primal force who held dominion over the earth, the sea, and the sky. But her true power lay in the places in between, the liminal spaces where worlds touched. She was most famously the goddess of crossroads, particularly those that split into three paths. The ancient Greeks believed these were places of supernatural power, where the veil between the world of the living and the world of spirits was thin. Travelers would often leave offerings at stone shrines built in her honor at these intersections, hoping for her protection on their journey. Hecate was the patron goddess of all who practiced magic. Witches and sorcerers would call upon her name to aid their spells. And she was particularly associated with necromancy, the art of communicating with the dead. Her power was in secrets, in herbs that could heal or harm, and in incantations spoken under the dark of a new moon. She was a goddess of the night, often depicted holding two blazing torches. These were not just to light the way in the physical darkness, but to illuminate the unseen world, allowing her to guide souls and perceive things hidden from mortal eyes. She was said to roam the earth on moonless nights, accompanied by a retinue of restless ghosts and the terrifying sound of howling dogs. Her connection to the underworld is deep and ancient. In some versions of the myth of Persephone, it was Hecate, from her cave, who was the only one besides Demeter to hear the maiden's cries as she was taken by Hades. Carrying her torches, Hecate joined Demeter in her desperate search. After the compromise was reached, Hecate became Persephone's loyal companion and attendant in the underworld, a trusted guide for the young queen in her dark and unfamiliar kingdom. Hecate is often depicted in a triple form, with three bodies or three heads standing back to back, so she can look down all three paths of a crossroads at once. She holds her torches, a key that can unlock the gates of the underworld, and sometimes a dagger. She is a figure of immense power, a goddess who understands the mysteries that lie at the heart of life, death, and the magic that binds them both together. She is the guardian of the threshold, a silent and knowing presence in the dark. For most Greeks, the vision of the afterlife was a somber one, a final, hollow existence in the asphodel meadows. But this was not the only belief. Running parallel to the mainstream myths were the secret teachings of the mystery cults, religious groups that offered their followers a more personal and hopeful path after death. For those initiated into their secret rites, the underworld was not just an end, but a gateway. These cults were highly secretive, and their core doctrines were only revealed to initiates who had sworn a vow of silence. The most famous of these was the Eleusinian Mysteries, centered around the worship of Demeter and Persephone. For nearly 2,000 years, people from all over the Greek world flocked to the sanctuary at Eleusis to take part in their sacred rituals. Initiates would reenact Demeter's desperate search for her daughter, a powerful and emotional journey that promised to change their relationship with death. Those who completed the rites were promised a blessed afterlife, escaping the gloomy fate of the average soul and finding a place of joy after their passing. For them, Persephone was not just a queen of the dead, but a savior, and Hades was a keeper of sacred secrets of death, return, and rebirth. Another powerful set of beliefs came from Orphism, a tradition based on the teachings of the mythical poet Orpheus. Having journeyed through the underworld himself, Orpheus was believed to have brought back a deeper understanding of the soul's true nature and destiny. The Orphics had their own creation story, one that taught that human beings possessed a dual nature, a sinful, earthly body inherited from the ashes of the Titans, and a pure, divine soul that came from the god Dionysus. The goal of an Orphic life was to purify this divine soul from its bodily prison, They believed in reincarnation, the idea that the soul went through cycles of life and death. After death, the soul would be judged and spend time in the underworld, either in a state of purification or punishment, before being reborn into a new mortal body. This was known as the grievous cycle, and the ultimate aim was to live such a pious and ascetic life that the soul could finally break free from the cycle of rebirth and achieve a permanent, blissful union with the divine. These beliefs transformed the map of the underworld. It was no longer a final destination for most, but a temporary stage in a much grander spiritual journey. The rivers of forgetfulness and memory, Lethe and Mnemosyne, became critically important. Orphic texts contained instructions for the dead, telling them to bypass the river Lethe, lest they forget their sacred knowledge, and instead drink from the waters of Mnemosyne to preserve their memory and aid their journey toward liberation. For followers of these mystery rites, Hades was not an ending, but a gatekeeper to the next beginning. These secret teachings offered a glimmer of light in the darkness, a promise that death was not a final, sorrowful silence, but simply another passage in the soul's long and winding road home. The torments of Tartarus were not reserved solely for kings who defied the gods. The pit also held those whose crimes were a deep betrayal of human bonds, their punishments reflecting the hollow nature of their transgressions. If you were to look past the straining form of Sisyphus and the spinning wheel of Ixion, you might notice a group of women engaged in a task just as hopeless, their eternal labor a quiet testament to a terrible crime. These are the Danaïdes, the 50 daughters of King Danaus. Their story begins with a family feud. Danis and his twin brother, Aegyptus, were locked in a bitter rivalry. Aegyptus had 50 sons, and he demanded they marry the 50 daughters of Danaus. Fearing that this was a plot to seize his kingdom, or perhaps to fulfill a dark prophecy, Danaus fled with his daughters from Libya to the shores of Argos, seeking refuge. But the 50 sons of Aegyptus pursued them, relentless in their demand for the mass marriage. Cornered and with no other options, Danaus seemingly agreed to the union. But on the eve of the wedding, he gave each of his 50 daughters a dagger and a single, chilling command they were to murder their new husbands in their sleep on their wedding night. That night, as the celebrations ended, 49 of the daughters dutifully carried out their father's order, violating the sacred vows of marriage and kinship in a single, bloody act. Only one daughter, Hypermnestra, disobeyed. Her husband, Lynceus, had honored her wish to remain a virgin, and moved by his respect and kindness, she spared his life, helping him escape into the night. But her 49 sisters showed no such mercy. For this horrific crime, the 49 murderous daughters were condemned to Tartarus. Their punishment was a masterpiece of symbolic futility, echoing the pointless labor of Sisyphus. They were commanded to spend eternity filling a large vessel, sometimes said to be a bath or bottomless cask, with water. The task seemed simple enough, but the jars they were given to carry the water were riddled with holes, like sieves. And so, you would see them in an endless procession. They walk to a nearby stream, fill their leaking jars, and hurry back to the great vessel, watching in despair as the water trickles out, soaking the ground around their feet. For every drop they manage to pour in, another leaks out. The bath will never be full. Their task can never be completed. Their labor is as empty and as futile as the marriage vows they scorned. They are trapped in a cycle of endless effort and immediate failure. Their punishment a quiet, eternal reminder that the guilt of their crime can never be washed away. We have spoken at length of the journey of the soul, of its judgment and its final destination. But it is worth pausing to ask a more fundamental question. What, to the ancient Greeks, was a soul? The answer is more complex than you might imagine, and it evolved over time, shifting from a simple life force to the very essence of a person's being. In the earliest Greek myths, such as those found in Homer's epics, the soul was called the psyche, a word that also meant breath of life. When a person died, their psyche was thought to depart from the body with their last gasp of air. It was this vital breath that animated the physical form. Once it was gone, what remained was a mere phantom, an eidolon, or image of the person who had lived. This shade looked just like the person at the moment of their death, and it retained their form, but it lacked everything that truly made them who they were. It had no real consciousness, no intellect, no will, and no personality. The thinking, feeling part of a person was believed to reside in the body and its organs, and it perished with them. So, the soul that journeyed to the underworld was little more than a witless, fluttering echo, a dreamlike image with no substance or mind. This is why the shades in the asphodel meadows are so listless, and why Odysseus had to give them the vitality of blood before they could remember their own lives and speak with him. But as Greek thought deepened, influenced by philosophers and the mystery cults, this idea of the soul began to change. For thinkers like Plato and the followers of Orphism, the soul was not just a breath. It was the true, immortal self. It was the seat of reason, morality, and identity. In this view, the physical body was not the source of personality, but a temporary prison or tomb that trapped the pure, divine soul within it. Life, then, became a trial. The goal was to live a life of virtue and wisdom in order to purify the soul from the distractions and corruptions of its physical vessel. The underworld was no longer just a final resting place, but a stage in this purification process, a place where the soul would be cleansed before its next journey, often through reincarnation into a new body. The ultimate goal was to break the cycle of rebirth entirely and allow the perfected soul to return to its divine origin. No myth better captures this evolved understanding than the beautiful tale of Eros and Psyche. As the story tells us, Psyche was a mortal woman whose beauty rivaled that of a goddess, and whose very name in Greek meant both soul and breath of life. She endured a series of impossible trials, tasks meant to crush her spirit, all for the sake of being reunited with her divine love, Eros. Her journey, filled with suffering, perseverance, and devotion, is a grand allegory for the soul's own path through the hardships of mortal life. In the end, after facing death itself, she is not destroyed. She is transformed, made immortal, and welcomed into Olympus as the goddess of the soul. Her story served as a powerful message of hope that the soul, through endurance and love, could overcome any trial and eventually achieve a divine and eternal peace. As the concept of the soul evolved, so too did the landscape of the underworld. For the followers of the mystery cults, the journey after judgment was not a simple assignment to one of the three realms. It involved a critical, final choice, a choice between forgetting and remembering, represented by two sacred springs or pools of water. After passing before the judges, the soul of an initiate would find itself at a fork in the path. To the left stood a white cypress tree, and beneath it a spring whose waters were milky and still. This was the spring of Lethe, the personification of forgetfulness. To drink from this water was to erase the self. It would wash away the memories of a past life, its triumphs, its sorrows, its lessons, and its loves. It would also erase the sacred knowledge gained through their initiation. This was the drink that led to the oblivion of the asphodel meadows, where the soul would become a witless shade, doomed to wander in a dreamless state before being reborn into the world with no memory of its divine origin. It was a release from pain, but at the cost of one's own identity. To the right, however, was another spring. Its waters were cool and clear, flowing from a place known as the Lake of Memory, or Mnemosyne. Mnemosyne was not just a name for a spring. She was the great Titan goddess of memory, the mother of all 9 muses, who inspired art, literature, and science. Her waters were the antithesis of Lethe. To drink from this spring was to achieve a higher state of consciousness. It allowed the soul to remember everything, not just its most recent mortal life, but its entire cosmic journey, its divine nature, and the sacred teachings of the mysteries. The uninitiated would drink from Lethe by default, but the followers of the Orphic tradition were buried with specific instructions, often inscribed on thin gold tablets placed in their graves. These tablets served as a passport and a guide for the soul. They would read something like this: "You will find a spring to your left, by a white cypress. Approach it not. You will find another, cool water flowing from the lake of memory. The guardians will ask you who you are. Tell them, I am a child of earth and of starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. Then they will give you to drink from the divine spring, and you shall reign amongst the other heroes." This choice was the ultimate test. By consciously choosing memory over forgetfulness, the soul affirmed its divine identity and its desire to break free from the grievous cycle of reincarnation. Drinking from Mnemosyne was the final step in the soul's long journey of purification. It ensured a truly blessed afterlife in the company of heroes, not as a hollow shade, but as a complete and enlightened being. This beautiful and profound concept transformed the underworld from a simple place of the dead into a spiritual landscape of trial and choice, where the ultimate fate of the soul depended not just on the judgment of kings, but on its own power to remember who it truly was. We have explored the fates of the souls and the philosophies that shaped them. But now, let us journey to the very center of power in the underworld, the administrative and spiritual heart of the entire realm. Deep within the land of the dead, beyond the fields and the rivers, stands the silent and colossal palace of Hades. This is no castle of fire and brimstone. It is a structure of immense and somber grandeur, built from polished black obsidian that seems to drink the faint, shadowy light of the realm. Its walls are vast and unadorned, rising high into the gloomy air, and its gates are said to be made of solid adamant, so strong that they can never be breached. This is the fortress of the king, the center of all authority. And it is as quiet and as imposing as Hades himself. To pass through its gates is to enter a world of profound and absolute silence. Unlike the boisterous halls of Olympus, which echo with laughter, arguments, and the music of Apollo's lyre, the halls of Hades' palace are soundless. Your footsteps would not echo on the stone floors. The very air seems to absorb all noise, creating a hush that is both peaceful and unnerving. The corridors are vast and empty, lit only by the faint, cold glow of crystals embedded in the walls, or by the ghostly flicker of torches that burn without warmth. At the heart of the palace lies the great throne room. Here, the silence is at its most absolute. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised dais, sit two magnificent thrones. One, belonging to Hades, is carved from a single, massive piece of polished black rock, severe and powerful. Beside it is the throne of Persephone, equally as regal, but perhaps inlaid with silver carvings of poppies or pomegranates, symbols of her dual nature as a goddess of both life and death. It is from here that the royal couple presides over their kingdom, issuing judgments and maintaining the unshakable order of their domain. The palace is not empty, though its inhabitants are as quiet as the stones themselves. Shadowy servants, perhaps the shades of kings and queens from ages past, glide through the halls, attending to their duties without a word. The three great judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus, may hold their court in a great hall nearby, their voices low as they decide the fates of the newly arrived. And Hecate, with her twin torches, is a frequent visitor here, a powerful and respected presence as she attends to her queen, Persephone. Surrounding the palace are quiet courtyards and gardens, but they are unlike any in the mortal world. Here, Persephone tends to her groves of black poplars and sterile willows. The flowers that bloom here are pale and scentless asphodels, poppies, and ghostly white roses that blossom without ever feeling the warmth of the sun. It is a place of stark, haunting beauty, a garden of memory and sorrow. The Palace of Hades is the ultimate bureaucracy, the quiet administrative center of the cosmos's largest kingdom. It is not a place of active evil, but one of solemn duty. It is the still, dark heart of the underworld, a monument to the permanence of death and the quiet, unyielding authority of the king who reigns over it all. The underworld was not a completely sealed-off realm. While its primary function was to contain the dead, it was also a source of phenomena that touched the world of the living in mysterious ways. It was understood to be the birthplace of dreams, the great, dark well from which all visions, both true and false, flowed into the minds of sleeping mortals. And these dreams, according to the poets, emerged into our world through one of two great gates. These were the gates of horn and ivory, portals that stood at the edge of the underworld, often near the cave of Hypnos, the god of sleep. Each gate was made of a different material, and each represented a different kind of truth. The first was the gate of horn. Imagine a great archway crafted from polished, translucent horn, a material that, when shaved thin, allows a soft, true light to pass through it. The dreams that came through this gate were the dreams of consequence. They were genuine prophecies, divine warnings sent by the gods, and true visions of what was to come. These dreams were reliable, if often cryptic. A hero might be warned of a coming danger, or a king might receive guidance on a matter of state. When a true dream needed to reach a mortal, it passed through the gate of horn. Beside it stood the second portal, the gate of ivory. This gate was carved from gleaming, flawless, and perfectly white elephant ivory. It was beautiful to behold, but its surface was opaque and deceptive. The dreams that issued from this gate were false. They were flattering illusions, wishful fantasies, anxieties given form, and confusing nightmares designed to mislead and trouble the soul. They were shades and shadows that promised much, but signified nothing. For every true prophetic dream that came through the gate of horn, 1,000 deceptive ones were said to stream forth from the gate of ivory, filling the minds of mortals with chaos and doubt. This belief created a profound sense of uncertainty for the ancient Greeks. When you awoke from a powerful dream, you could never be entirely sure of its origin. Was it a true message from the gods, a vision passed through horn, or was it a meaningless and beautiful lie, a phantom sent through ivory in Homer's Odyssey? Penelope speaks of these two gates, wondering aloud if her dream of her husband Odysseus's return is a true hope or just a cruel deception. This duality speaks to the Greek understanding of the world that truth and illusion are often intertwined, and that wisdom lies in learning to tell the difference. The gates of horn and ivory were a powerful metaphor for this struggle. They represented the constant challenge of navigating a world where not everything is as it seems, and where even messages from the divine could be beautiful, polished, and ultimately false. The underworld, therefore, was not just the source of our final end, but also the nightly source of our hopes, our fears, and our most beautiful deceptions. The justice of the underworld, for all its finality, was not arbitrary. It was administered by 3 souls who had been chosen for their impeccable virtue and wisdom during their mortal lives. They were not gods, but men, kings whose fairness on earth had earned them an eternity of responsibility in the land of the dead. Let us look more closely at these 3 figures who held the fate of every soul in their hands. The first of these is Rhadamanthus. In life, he was a son of Zeus and the mortal princess Europa, and brother to King Minos. He was a legendary lawgiver in Crete, and his legal code was so renowned for its logic and impartiality that other Greek cities willingly adopted it. He was a man who lived by the principle that justice should be swift, fair, and unbending. After his death, he was given a fitting role to preside over the judgment of the souls arriving from the eastern lands, and, in some traditions, to govern the paradise of Elysium, his just nature making him the perfect overseer for the realm of the blessed. The second judge was Aeacus, another son of Zeus who reigned as the king of the island of Aegina. He was known not so much for his laws as for his profound piety and his unwavering devotion to the gods. When a terrible plague, sent by a jealous Hera, wiped out his entire population, Aeacus prayed so fervently to his father Zeus that the god, taking pity, transformed the ants on the island into a new, industrious people, the Myrmidons, who would later become the famed soldiers of Achilles. Aeacus's reputation for fairness was so great that he was often called upon to settle disputes not just among men, but among the gods themselves. In the underworld, he was entrusted with guarding the keys to the realm and judging the souls who came from the western lands. The third and most senior of the judges was the great king Minos of Crete, also a son of Zeus and Europa. His legacy was more complex than that of his brother and his peer. He was the ruler of the magnificent Minoan civilization, a king who communed directly with Zeus to bring law to his people. But his reign was also touched by darkness, most famously in the myth of the Minotaur, the monstrous offspring of his wife. which he imprisoned within a great labyrinth. Because of his direct connection to the king of the gods and the immense complexity of his own life, Minos was given the most difficult role in the afterlife. He presided over the tribunal, arbitrating the most challenging cases and casting the final, deciding vote. The selection of these three specific men is deeply meaningful. They represent the three great pillars of a just society. Rhadamanthus, the embodiment of impartial law. Aeacus, the symbol of piety and respect for the divine, and Minos, the figure of ultimate authority and wisdom. Their presence on the thrones of judgment assured every soul that its life would be weighed not by the whim of a capricious god, but by the highest standards of human justice, wisdom, and virtue. The vision of the underworld. We have been exploring a complex realm of distinct regions. Moral judgments and spiritual trials was not conceived all at once. It is a rich tapestry woven from threads of belief that changed and deepened over hundreds of years. The underworld, known to the earliest Greeks, was a far simpler and perhaps grimmer place than the one imagined by the philosophers who came later. Our earliest detailed glimpse into the realm comes from the poet Homer in his epic, The Odyssey. The underworld Odysseus visits is a dreary, joyless place, a land of perpetual mist and shadow located at the western edge of the world. In this Homeric version, there is very little moral distinction in the afterlife. Almost everyone, regardless of their virtue or wickedness in life, ends up in the same place as a witless, fluttering shade. The great hero and the common farmer share the same hollow existence. Only a handful of truly legendary sinners, like Tantalus and Sisyphus, are singled out for specific punishments. It is this bleak vision that prompts the hero Achilles to declare that he would rather be a slave to the poorest man on earth than be king over all the dead. For Homer, life was everything, and the afterlife was a sorrowful, empty echo. As the centuries passed, poets like Hesiod and the writers of great tragedies began to add new layers of complexity and justice to this vision. The idea of Elysium, a paradise for heroes, became more prominent. The playwrights of classical Athens, in particular, used the underworld as a powerful stage for exploring human nature and divine justice. They gave its stories irony and dramatic weight, focusing on the Furies as agents of cosmic law and the consequences of mortal actions. The most significant evolution, however, came from the philosophers, who looked past the myths and saw a landscape of profound spiritual meaning. Plato, in particular, transformed the underworld from a gloomy resting place into an intricate system of moral purification and reincarnation. In his famous Myth of at the end of his work, The Republic, a soldier named dies, journeys through the afterlife, and returns to describe a highly structured process. Souls are judged, then spend 1,000 years being either rewarded or punished for their deeds in life. Afterward, they are gathered together and allowed to choose their next life before drinking from the river Lethe to forget their time in the underworld and be reborn. This Platonic vision, heavily influenced by the teachings of Orphism and the mystery cults, introduced a powerful moral and spiritual purpose to existence. Life was no longer just a single story ending in oblivion, but one chapter in the soul's long journey toward enlightenment. The underworld became a necessary place of learning and cleansing, where the soul accounted for its actions and prepared for the next stage. And so, the underworld we imagine today is a synthesis of all these beliefs. It has the somber shadowy atmosphere of Homer, the dramatic justice of the playwrights, and the deep, philosophical hope of Plato and the mysteries. It was a concept that was never static, but grew and evolved alongside the Greek people themselves, forever reflecting their changing understanding of life, death, and what it means to be human. Our journey has shown us that the underworld was far more than a simple, empty void. It was a complete and self-contained cosmos, with its own geography, its own laws, and even its own unique and symbolic nature. The flora and fauna that inhabited this realm were not accidental details. They were rich with meaning, helping to paint a picture of a world that was both a reflection of our own and a stark contrast to it. The plant life of the underworld was somber and symbolic. The most prevalent, of course, were the pale, ghostly flowers of the asphodel meadows, their gray-white blossoms covering the plains where the dead wandered. In the mortal world, these flowers were often associated with tombs and funerals, and so they became the staple crop of the afterlife, a bland and sorrowful food for the shades. At the entrance to the underworld, Persephone's sacred groves could be found, filled with black poplar trees and sterile willows, both potent symbols of death and mourning in ancient Greece. But the most significant fruit of the realm was the pomegranate, with its tough, leathery skin hiding a treasure of blood-red, jewel-like seeds. It was the perfect symbol for Persephone herself, a representation of the hidden sweetness of life, the cycle of death and rebirth, and the binding promise that tied her to her dark kingdom. The creatures of the underworld were equally symbolic. The most famous, of course, was Cerberus, the three-headed hound who stood as the ultimate guardian. But the realm was filled with other spectral beasts. Hecate was often accompanied by her own pack of howling hellhounds, and the shades of the dead themselves were often compared to bats, fluttering witlessly through the endless twilight of Hades. Serpents were a recurring and powerful motif. They writhed in the hair of the Furies and formed the mane and tail of Cerberus. Snakes, in ancient Greece, were deeply chthonic creatures, meaning they were associated with the earth and the underworld. Because they live in cracks in the ground and shed their skin, they were potent symbols of the earth's hidden power, of transformation, and of rebirth. Their venom also made them symbols of death and danger, perfectly capturing the dual nature of the realm. Even the birds had their place. The nocturnal screech owl, with its haunting, lonely cry, was considered a bird of ill omen and a messenger of Hecate. Its presence signified a connection to the world of spirits and the coming of night. Together, these details of flora and fauna created a complete and tangible ecosystem of the dead. It was a world that operated by its own rules, sustained by its own sorrowful nature. The ancient Greeks imagined a realm that was not just a philosophical concept, but a real, physical place with sights, sounds, and inhabitants, all steeped in the deep, symbolic language of myth. This vivid, self-contained world made the afterlife feel more immediate, more real, and its lessons all the more powerful. Having journeyed through the geography of the dead, from the sorrowful plains of Asphodel to the fiery pit of Tartarus, let us pause for a moment. Let us step back from the myths and ask a quiet question. What does this sprawling, shadowy kingdom truly tell us about the people who created it? The Greek underworld was not just a collection of frightening tales. It was a mirror, reflecting the deepest values, fears, and ideals of the ancient civilization that imagined it. More than anything else, the underworld reflects a profound appreciation for order. The entire realm is a testament to structure over chaos. It is a highly organized system. It has borders defined by its 5 great rivers, a strict and unyielding king, a formal judicial process, and clearly delineated realms for every type of soul. This intricate bureaucracy of the afterlife mirrors the Greek philosophical obsession with bringing cosmos, or order, to the universe. Just as Zeus defeated the chaotic titans to establish his measured rule over the heavens, Hades maintains a rigid and predictable system below. There are no random punishments or escapes. Every soul is processed, judged, and sent to its proper place. The rules are absolute. This system also reveals a deep-seated belief in justice. The judgment of the 3 kings and the tailored punishments of Tartarus, where the punishment suits the crime, show a world where actions have ultimate consequences. However, this was not a justice based on simple good versus evil. It was a justice concerned with balance and respect for divine and natural law. The greatest sins were not theft or dishonesty, but hubris, the prideful arrogance that led a mortal to challenge the gods or disrupt the sacred order of things. Furthermore, the structure of the journey itself highlights the immense value placed on ritual and social duty. The necessity of a proper burial and the single coin for Karen demonstrate that a person's peaceful afterlife depended directly on the responsibilities of the living. To be forgotten, to be left unburied, was to be condemned to a restless eternity, lost between worlds. To be remembered and honored through these final rites was to be given your best chance at peace. In this way, memory itself became a sacred act, and perhaps, most tellingly, the nature of the Asphodel Meadows reveals the greatest Greek fear, not the fear of pain, but the fear of insignificance. The fate of the average person was not torment, but an endless, gray oblivion, the complete erasure of personality, passion, and memory. This underscores how much the Greeks cherished life in the sunlit world. Life, with all its struggles, was infinitely preferable to even the most peaceful existence as a witless shade. It is why Achilles, the greatest of heroes, would rather be a slave among the living than a king among the dead. The underworld, in its quiet, somber reality, served as a constant reminder to make one's life matter, to strive for excellence, and to create a story worth remembering. To understand the underworld is to understand its king. Hades, in his silence and his solitude, is perhaps the most revealing figure in the entire pantheon. The way the Greeks revered and feared him speaks volumes about their relationship with death itself. He was not worshipped with joyous festivals. In fact, ancient Greeks rarely built temples for him, terrified of attracting his attention. His name was spoken in whispers, or not at all. This was not because he was hated, but because he was the embodiment of the inevitable. He was the god of the one appointment that every mortal must keep. In a world ruled by passionate, capricious, and often wildly emotional gods, Hades stands apart. He is defined by his consistency. While his brothers Zeus and Poseidon were constantly meddling, starting wars, and pursuing mortals, Hades remained in his realm, a quiet and stable force. His kingdom ran smoothly because its ruler was not governed by impulse. He was, in a strange way, the most reliable of the gods. He upheld his own laws without exception. When he gave Orpheus the chance to retrieve Eurydice, he set one rule: And when Orpheus broke it, Hades simply enforced the consequence. There was no trickery, only the rules. He simply ensures that what must be, is. This made him a figure of immense respect. While the other gods might be swayed by flattery or tricked by mortals, Hades was steadfast. He was feared, yes, but in a world where even gods could be petty, he was also trusted. Sacrifices made to him were performed at night, with averted gazes, the smoke directed downward into the earth. It was a relationship built not on affection, but on a profound and solemn acknowledgement of his necessary power. He was the great anchor of the cosmos, the one who kept the dead from wandering back into the world of the living. He was the quiet manager of eternity, the king who carried the weight of every ending on his shoulders. He was not the villain of the Greek story. He was the final, somber truth. And in their careful, quiet reverence for him, the Greeks revealed a deep understanding that some forces are not meant to be loved, but simply to be acknowledged with the dignity and respect they are owed. And so, our journey through the great, shadowy kingdom comes to a close. The stories have been told, the heroes have departed, and the realm settles back into its natural state of profound and unshakable quiet. Let us leave it now with one final image. Imagine him, if you will, seated on his throne of volcanic stone, surrounded by shadow. Hades, the unseen king, is at rest. His great, dark robe falls in quiet folds around him. The halls of his palace are still, the air thick with the scent of myrrh and memory. Beside him, his queen, Persephone, walks through her garden of pale flowers, the kind that bloom without ever needing the sun. The great rivers flow on, their currents of sorrow and forgetfulness silent and eternal. On the banks of the Styx, the ferryman Charon has moored his skiff for the night, the waters black and undisturbed. At the gates, the monstrous Cerberus is finally asleep, his 3 heads resting on his massive paws, his serpent tail still for the first time in an age. Out in the vast plains, the shades of the asphodel meadows continue their slow, silent drift, their murmurs no louder than the dust settling in a forgotten room. In the fiery pit of Tartarus, the great sinners find no rest, but from here their cries are only a distant, imagined echo. And in the sunlit fields of Elysium, the heroes have laid down their phantom swords, their laughter softening into the gentle hum of a lyre played somewhere in the twilight. The entire kingdom is breathing in a slow, eternal rhythm. There are no new arrivals, no judgments to be passed, no pleas to be heard. All is as it should be. The king is in his hall, the dead are in their place, and the great, complex machinery of the afterlife has settled into a deep and abiding peace. This is the underworld, not in its moments of drama, but in its essence a place of order, of finality, and of an all-encompassing, absolute calm. The great, dark kingdom is settled, its king at rest, its halls shrouded in peace. The world has turned, and the time for stories has passed. The time for silence is here. And so, sleep now. Let the earth hold you gently. Let the quiet of that ancient realm be a comfort, not a fear. The hush of that kingdom can now lull you into rest. Breathe slowly, and with each breath, let your thoughts drift away like leaves on the dark, still water of the Acheron. There is nothing left for you to do, nothing left to see. The journey is over. You are safe in your own bed, far from the land of shades. You are not being judged tonight. There are no trials to face, no rivers to cross. The king of this silent land is occupied with his own domain, keeping watch over those already gone. He is patient, and he is constant. Hades waits, but not for you, not yet. Let the deep, abiding quiet of his realm be your blanket. Imagine the calm of the asphodel meadows, the dreamless peace of the shades, and let it be yours. Let the river of forgetfulness gently wash away the cares of the day, leaving only stillness behind. The torches are out, the gates are closed, and the great hound sleeps. You are watched over now, not by a fearsome god, but by the profound peace of a kingdom at rest. Let Hades guard your rest. Let the present fade out as the past fades in, and let sleep take you gently. Sleep well.